now been over 2 months with the $200 Creality Ender 3, and I've been printing miniatures and terrain on it non-stop. The real question is, do I recommend it? Well, let's find out. Hi everyone, Danny 3D Printing DM here. Welcome to 3D Printed Tabletop, a channel where we cover all things related to 3D printing for your tabletop games. Earlier this year, a new budget printer popped up, the Creality Ender 3. And since then, a lot of folks in the tabletop gaming community have bought them both to print miniatures, like you see here, as well as terrain, like you see here. This printer's entry-level price point of about $180 to $240, as well as the quality that it produces and the print volume size, how big the build plate is, are some of the reasons why a lot of people wanted to give it a shot. Myself included. This printer wasn't given to me by any company, it wasn't sponsored by anybody. I bought this with my own money. So today's review is completely my own. I also did a first thoughts video on this within the first week or two of getting this printer, and now that it's been a while, a lot of people have been asking me how I feel about the printer now. So if you are one of those people, then this video is for you. Fair warning. My review today isn't going to be very technical. If you're looking for a super quantitative, methodical review, you should probably check out a few other review videos as well, because this video is going to be more of a discussion. It's going to be more of a real warts and all kind of status of the printer, if you will, based on months of listening and helping, folks who've also bought this printer. That is what I feel I can contribute to you as a new viewer that other reviews might not cover. For those who want a quick summary, a TLDW, as you will, this is truly a $200 printer, but it's a very good value $200 printer in my opinion, once you get it going. This printer suffers from similar issues as other overseas clones, right? It can break, and you can have quality control issues, and getting it running well can be a challenge for some people. For many folks who've bought this printer as their first printer, they love it, and they've had no issues. And yet for other folks, they struggle with it, and they've had to work through some issues like some of the ones that I'll address later. Thanks to the amazingly robust community for this printer, myself and a lot of other people have been able to work through these kinks. And honestly, I have been pretty amazed by the results. Once I got things fixed, it continued to provide that really outstanding print that I talked about in my first thoughts video. This kind of pattern of fixing things and getting things working, and once it works really well, has kind of been my experience with all overseas printers, pretty much at the $500 below price point. So overall, I do still recommend it for new folks, but I do ask you to temper your expectations with some of the things that I'll be sharing with you today. First, quality control seems to be an issue with this printer, and just because the printer is capable of getting prints like the ones I'm showing you, that doesn't mean that it's a frustration-free printer. One of the most common issues I've seen with this is a warped bed. Having an unlevel bed is an issue because you'll have adhesion issues and it'll mess up a whole bunch of other things as the print continues. It's a quick fix. Most people just buy a glass or a mirror and kind of cut it to size, or they'll buy a special build that kind of goes on top to cover it. Those are the options, and they're pretty cheap fixes, $5 to $15 most of the time. And while my bed didn't come warped, I did have a lot of other issues that I had to work through. This printer's bed surface is too good. At least it was for me. The gunk that you see on here is literally PLA that is from the bottom of some failed prints that basically fused with the surface, and I'd either have to destroy the surface or I'd have to print on top of it to remove it. At least that was my experience. It was too hard to remove otherwise. And as a result, I've learned to love rafts on the Ender 3, which is something I would never have imagined me saying with my CR10. It's almost blasphemous to say that, but I really do. I love printing with rafts now, even with prints that are completely flat that don't need it, because it removes so quickly off the raft, and it just makes it so much easier to remove them. Other thing that happened is that the plastic filament guide started wearing on me, and my filament started snapping in the middle of prints. And so I am using this filament feeder thingy over here that I printed with bearings in it. Also got a few clogs, which, usually happens on any printer, not a big deal. Besides that, for a very long time, I was getting really good prints. Only with some stringing, which didn't bother me as much because I acknowledge that I'm pretty lazy when it comes to things like retraction settings and I just remove it all the time anyways when I'm printing minis and stuff, so I usually don't worry about it too much. I'm definitely not a perfectionist printer. And then I started getting really bad under extrusion, which is much more difficult for me to compensate for with my craftiness. I literally tried changing everything I could for under extrusion. Nozzle, my PTFE tube, my couplers. Literally, I tried a new gear. I mean, I tried like everything. I tried changing this set out. I tried everything. And finally, after changing everything, this kind of solved my problems. And I thought, man, I troubleshot it. Great. That was a great troubleshooting of a one-off problem that I had. When I saw that Angus of Maker's Muse had the same issue, and he discovered this issue from Chuck of Filament Friday, and then Chris from Neris talking about the setup to fix all of his Ender 3s, the multiple Ender 3s that he'd gotten, the signs were clear to me that the possibility of getting a machine that you'd have to troubleshoot and work through is very possible at this moment in time. Sure, it could have been that Angus and Chris and Chuck got bad machines, but when big YouTubers experience this, you gotta take it for what it is, to be honest. And all this is what I mean when I say this is a $200 budget printer. You can definitely run into these challenges, and as much as I'd love for everyone's experience to be super smooth, these are issues I think you should be kind of mentally ready to face when you are buying any cheap printer, not just the Ender 3. Once I got through this kind of ring of fire, it was back to business for me. I was getting really great prints again. And the fact that even some of these seasoned, experienced printers like YouTubers like Angus, the fact that they found some of their answers to their struggles from other folks on YouTube leads me to my next point, which is number 2, that the user group for this printer is pretty amazing in my opinion. A lot of people got the Ender 3 when they first came out, and they've been using it and testing it and sharing their experiences online, not just on YouTube, on Facebook, on Reddit, you name it, anywhere where people kind of get together to talk about 3D printing stuff. The Facebook group, formerly known as the Creality Ender 3 user group, has grown to now over 5,000 people in a little span of just a couple of months. And there are definitely a lot of really experienced people in those groups that love to help and answer when you post and you have issues with it. I can't stress how incredible of an asset this is. There's tons of people making videos on this on YouTube and in Facebook and on Reddit, because it means when you've got that issue yourself, if you are a noob, you can go to somebody, and more than likely they'll be able to help you if you are stuck and your Google foo is off. This was really important to me when I just started, because I, again, don't feel like I'm naturally techie. And that learning curve definitely did feel a lot harder for me. So I sympathize with those of you who have struggled. I've seen some of you go through things not unlike what I went through when I got my first CR10, and it's no exception with the Ender 3. Now, saying that there's a great user community isn't necessarily a plus for Creality, but it is absolutely a plus for anybody considering to get a specific 3D printer where, fixing and troubleshooting a printer is a reality that you just might run into when you first buy this printer. That being said, I want to be completely fair to Creality, which leads me to my third point, which is that Creality really seems to be listening to community feedback. I don't know many overseas companies that have actively listened to 3D printing community quite like Creality has. Creality's recently brought on Naomi, Sexy Cyborg Woo, to be their community rep. And honestly, she's everywhere. She's responding to Angus on YouTube. She responded to me on Reddit. She responded to me on YouTube, which, YouTube is not easy to respond to people for when you're getting like hundreds of comments a day on videos. And it's not just that she's responding. The Ender 3 has recently gone open source, which means that not only has the firmware been released, but pretty much everything else, the schematics, everything is there. After the whole GPL violation thing, I think this shows great maturity from the company. It's also worth noting that since that first wave of printers, Creality has made improvements to the things that they send out. Like, for example, my power supply cover is printed in a plastic, and the other ones is not. It's now full, injection mold is what you call it. I also brought up one issue to Naomi, which was the thermal runway, that it concerns me that it's coming from the factory disabled. I think this is a big issue for some people because you have to go and update the firmware, and a lot of people don't want to touch the firmware. If thermal runway came enabled, I think that would be a big plus for the company, but right now it's not. So if that's important to you, know that you will have to go in and update the firmware and make that change until, we get notice from Naomi that it's being turned on the way back from the factories. From my understanding, it's something that they're working on. I say I think this is something we're gonna, because again, Naomi responded to me. Up until this point, what she said has happened, and so I'm inclined to believe her, to be honest. Kudos to her for reaching out and representing the company, and I think trying to make a change over there in China and setting a high bar for other companies to follow. Finally, my last point is the most important point, and that is quality. I haven't been able to find a printer that can consistently get the results that this printer has gotten reproduced, at least as far as minis and terrain goes, for the price point that this printer comes in with the build volume that it comes with. Not only that, but this printer is relatively easy to build and get together. So I mean, when you think about it, this is quite a package for $180, $200. You know, and I highlight a lot of these challenges that can come with this printer because I want to be as transparent as possible about what your experience might be like. I also want to emphasize that, you know, when this printer is working well, it prints really well. You know, I've tried to make it as easy as possible for folks to get very good quality FDM print miniatures and terrain by sharing my profiles with you. I like to think that they've been helpful to that end. You know, and as I've shared in previous videos, it's not uncommon for folks to share their minis, to share some of their first minis in Facebook groups or on Reddit, and they're like a million times better than my first minis on my CR10. So I mean, this just speaks to my inability to understand my printer as a newbie, but I think you get the point here. Lots of other folks have been getting really great results off the bat as well, without the issues that I experienced, and I think that that's important to share as well. But I've met more folks who are happy and very satisfied with their overall experience with the Ender 3 than folks who have been dissatisfied or frustrated to the point where they've had to return it or feel like it was a wasted purchase. In the end, I want you to understand that if you're considering getting into 3D printing for miniatures and terrain, this is going to be a new hobby supporting a hobby for you. Regardless of whether you choose the Ender 3 as your first printer, it's going to take time, and once you start getting the hang of it and start printing those minis or those prints, it's going to feel worth it, I think. And you're going to be really proud of what you've done, and your players are going to appreciate it even more because they know the amount of work that you put into getting that. So at the time of this review, there isn't a cheaper printer that I'm aware of that has the same size of knowledgeable users, this build volume, that can consistently produce this level of FDM miniatures and terrain at this price point right now. And that is why ultimately for the 200-ish price range, I still think this is a great printer for folks looking to jump into the hobby, or maybe add a second printer to their collection if you want to print for your tabletop games. If you enjoyed this review and maybe have a little love for tabletop games, why not subscribe and join us down in the groups below. We'd love to help you get the most out of your 3D prints so your players will love you just a little bit more. Thanks again for watching, you guys. Happy printing and happy gaming.